For several people, the protests were simply an opportunity for frustrated individuals to participate in a unique event and to burn off excess energy in the name of freedom.
The protests. We've heard several comments on misrepresentation and excessive media coverage. We have a comment here: media lied about all of it. They wanted people not in Ottawa to think the protesters were a bunch of redneck hooligans causing mayhem. This is fairly representative of many comments that we received, which expressed low levels of trust for mainstream media compared to new media such as YouTube or other social media. In their view, mainstream media was misrepresenting the facts surrounding the protests. And in their view, that was often because these organizations receive subsidies from the state and therefore are mouthpieces for the government. Many people also expressed that excessive media coverage of the exceptions in Ottawa who displayed signs with profanity or historical hate symbols were being represented excessively and didn't actually represent the people who were at the protests. And these people expressed emotional distress at being associated with these hateful symbols. On nous a également parlé du...
So there was also a mention of the federal government discourse, and this was aiming at dividing the population. For many people, political representatives at the federal level tried to discredit the convoy. They just tried to feed the dominant discourse according to
our nation's capital and inviting anyone and everyone to join. Here was finally a place where we could take a stand and show our government that we did not agree. The Freedom Convoy protests represent a new marker in Canadian history. They brought Canadians together. They brought the world together. Inspiring protests in countries all over the world, the repercussions of the convoy spread far beyond what we could have ever imagined. Citizens of other countries waved Canadian flags, sang the Canadian national anthem, and messaged and commented on social media in support of the Canadians. We became the pinnacle of a peaceful protest. I would like the Commission to take a moment to process what that must have felt like to have spent hours, even days, waving a Canadian flag, singing O Canada, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, inviting our government to engage in a discussion about our democratic rights, and instead being labeled and criticized so harshly. Please imagine enduring the extreme cold temperatures, holding a sign above your head, just so you can finally have your voice heard and your life back. Imagine seeing people laughing together and dancing and standing guard on the tomb of the unknown soldier. Imagine just wanting your freedom back, not more, nothing demanding, just what you already had before. Then you come home, watch the news, and see yourself labeled as a domestic terrorist, as someone who does not represent the views of Canadians. 5, I supported the trucker convoy for many reasons and in many ways. I have truckers in my family, and they were coerced into taking the vaccines, and one family member was out of a job.
To us, and so they aren't organized in my papers, or at least to the extent Commission Council has been able to organize them relative to the way they were filed. And I know just from some emails that have come in as we've been preparing for this morning's appearance by you, other parties might have struggled with this as well. So I'll try to help parties along with the way I have organized them, at least. And the first one, Mr. Clerk, if you could call up SSM CAN 407845. And Minister Lametti, we're all going to, you and I think the people following are going to have to struggle with two things here. One is how one reads a text conversation when it gets printed out like this, especially when it's broken up into multiple pages. Who is speaking in which bubble as we go down. So I'll ask you to help me with that. I believe that the first bubble there, do we have a contingency? That is you speaking, am I correct there?
I believe that's right.
Okay, the date here is Sunday, January 30th, which would be, you might remember, the Sunday of the first weekend of the convoy arrival in Ottawa, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And can you explain, by the way, if I understand it correctly, and just look down a bit, this is a text exchange you're having with Alex Steinhaus, who I believe is your chief of staff?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
I believe it's a text exchange with him. I know he's my chief of staff.
And if, as near as I can follow it, you're in gray and he's in blue for this page, and that gets tricky because it switches around as we go between, depending on whose phone the message is from. Anyway, if we look at the first paragraph there, do we have a contingency for these trucks to be removed tomorrow or Tuesday, open parentheses, if they were Black or Indigenous, ellipsis, close parentheses? And I was wondering if you can help explain what point you were making to your chief of staff when you added the parenthetical comment to the initial statement.
Certainly. Look, there is evidence of systemic racism in our justice system. It's in my mandate letter. I do my best to try to root it out with various,
Sir,
but they do have to prepare. They do have to prepare. They're doing their jobs. They do have to prepare. I'm sorry that you don't
Sir,
like that answer, but it is the
I
truth.
just want to know if you agree with me that the first minister's meeting had not taken place yet.
I'm not a party to the email, so
Okay.
I'll take it in terms of what it says, but they're just planning for
Okay,
their
so,
job,
sir,
quite frankly.
If we can continue here. This email says, as discussed with you, Minister Lametti will also have brief remarks. And if we look up the page, there's a response to this email from David Taylor, your communications director, saying that he is drafting your remarks. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And the timing of that email is 11:06. That's exactly 1 minute after the email we just read.
That's correct.
And so, sir, what we see here is that David Taylor is drafting remarks, your remarks, for the 4:30 meeting at which the invocation of the Emergencies Act was announced. And he's drafting those remarks before the end of the First Minister's meeting.
Yes, but it's all hypothetical because
Well,
if
I put it to you,
I
sir.
have seen it. You can put it to me and I'll give you the answer, which
Sure,
is
then I put it to
it
you,
is
sir, that
not
the-
final until it's final. I have seen these announcements pulled 5 seconds before it's supposed to happen. They are preparing in order that it might happen. That is their job. That's why I pay David Taylor. And the same is true for PMO Communications and everyone else. That's
sir, I put it
good
to
governance.
you-
We're preparing for the eventuality that it will happen, but it does not happen until the final decision is made.
Commissioner, may I have 2 more minutes?
Sure.
Sir, I put it to you, you'll agree with me that the remarks you did make at 4:30 were in fact about invoking the Emergencies Act. And I will not put it, I will
Talk a bit about the communication around the invocation of the act. We can pull it up if we need to, actually. It's SSM CAN 404415. These are technical briefing notes, I think, that would have been prepared for you by someone in your office around potential questions that you might get about the Emergencies Act. And if we can go to page 3, sorry, you can see the beginning of the document there.
Yeah.
Page 3, the CSIS threat definition is discussed here. And the second question is, on what basis does the governor and council determine that the ongoing protest situation reaches the level of threats to the security of?
That was filed by by the Department of National Defense as part of its evidence in this hearing.
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. Now, even though we won't be having a lot of questions for you. They are very, very important questions that have come up before the commission and been raised by the parties in two areas that I'm going to concentrate Commission Council's questions on. And I'll just begin by headlining those two areas. One is the role that the Department of National Defense plays when a province makes a request for assistance to the federal government for assistance that is potentially or perhaps best provided by the Canadian Forces. And the second area is your views as the Minister of National Defense of the times, if ever, and the circumstances of which it would or would not be appropriate for personnel and equipment of the Canadian Armed Forces to be
here, and the next one certainly, because and that's because once cabinet policy is presented to the public, that policy is the agreed collective decision of all members of the cabinet, right?
The executive branch of government in a democracy.
Right. In fact, from a constitutional perspective, cabinet decisions are in effect your decisions, aren't they?
Our collective decisions as the executive branch of government in a parliamentary democracy, yes.
And you wouldn't say they're your decisions, but you're certainly party to the decision.
They are collective decisions.
All right. The invocation of the Emergencies Act this year was a cabinet decision, wasn't it?
Yes, it was,
So it was a collective decision that was in part your decision.
of the executive branch of government.
Right. And you can't publicly repudiate or criticize it, can you?
The importance of the declaration of a public order emergency is one with which I agree, one I support, given the circumstances of the time, the inability of children to go to school, the inability of people to go to work, the inability of trade to cross the border, the inability of citizens to live peacefully in certain parts of our country, the buildup of arms in certain areas, certainly the...
Just go slowly when you're reading, please.
Sure. Minister Mendicino asks how many tanks Minister Lametti would like deployed, and Minister Lametti reckons that just one will do. Do you agree with Minister Lametti that one tank would have been sufficient to deal with the Canadians who had gathered in Ottawa to express their grievances about government policy?
2 points. First, I believe Minister Lametti has mentioned that that was made in jest. Second, I have already provided my comments relating to the fact that the Canadian Armed Forces is the force of last resort. Therefore, we were not considering deploying tanks in any number.
Could we scroll up to the top of this? So can you read the date at the top of this message exchange?
Me?
Can you read it aloud for us, please?
You need to get the police to move and
No, I'm sorry, not the full text. I won't put you through that. I just meant the date at the very top.
Wednesday, February 2nd, 8:09 p.m.
Right. And Minister Lametti earlier on in testimony to this commission wrote the exchange off as a joke between friends. Do you think this is a joke?
I take no part of my role as Minister of National Defense as something unjust. Obviously, I am very concerned and was very concerned not only about the situation in Canada, but about the global strategic situation that we all find ourselves in. And so I am very concerned to make sure that we are making decisions with full information. And I know that's the case with Minister Lametti, as well as the other colleagues around the table. This was a very difficult time, and we were all doing our very best in our respective portfolios.
Right. But at the same time, on February 2nd, just a few days after the arrival of the protesters in Ottawa, this was the sort of joke that was considered funny among your cabinet colleagues, wasn't it?
I was actually not in Canada at the time. I was in Europe, as previously indicated, trying to launch Canada's response to a potential further invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I will say that I know that my colleagues take their work extremely seriously.
Does cabinet solidarity require you to find this joke funny? I'm sorry, that was a little frivolous. So just one final set of a couple of questions. After Minister Lametti wrote this off as a joke, he changed the subject, and he moved on to talking about how bringing in the CAF was a last resort, even more so than the Emergencies Act, which he characterized as a second last resort. But that's not precisely accurate, is it?
Do you mean Minister Lametti's statement or the content of his statement?
That the Emergencies Act is, that bringing in the CAF is the last resort and the Emergencies Act is the second last resort.
I think that is accurate.
Well, the Emergencies Act requires that an emergency be such that it can't be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. Would you agree with that?
Are you reading from a particular statutory section of the emergency?
I can show it to you if you'd like.
I have it here.
Okay, it's section 3. It's the end bit of section 3.
So the statute is a legal instrument, and the reference here is any other law of Canada.
Yeah, all right, thank you. The National Defence Act is a law of Canada, wouldn't you agree? Those are my questions.
Section 273 points to any other method of addressing law enforcement other than with the assistance of the CAF. So one deals with a statutory instrument and instruments that are available to address a particular situation, and the other deals with instances in which the CAF can be deployed.
Nonetheless, the Emergencies Act.
Wish to affirm? Affirm, please. For the record, please state your full name and spell it out.
Omar Alghabra, Omar Alghabra, EBRA.
And regulation in each of the provinces and territories. And would that level of connectivity and intergovernmental relations also apply at the ministerial level?
Indeed. I would say I have very constructive, positive relationship with my provincial counterparts. We meet at least once a year in Council of Ministers. Transportation is one of those areas that has a lot of shared responsibilities between the federal and provincial governments. So we either meet as a council or one-on-one. This is quite a common practice throughout my year and a half as a Minister of Transport.
And at the ministerial level, did you, for the purposes of implementing?
I don't think we could say thank you enough to truckers for their professionalism and for their job. And to answer your question about how policies were developed throughout the pandemic, these were done based on the advice that we received from public health, and also taking into account considerations of the realities on the ground. And there have been several professions and several categories that were granted exemptions at the beginning of the pandemic.
And truckers were one of them?
Truckers were one of them.
Okay, and you note in your witness statement that the protests arose in response to the elimination of that designation, correct?
My understanding is that the protests rose to oppose all mandates, not just truckers' mandate.
But you state in your interview summary, which you adopted, it states that your understanding was that the protest arose in response to the elimination of that designation, right?
I think it was a trigger, but again, I am not here to speak on behalf of the protesters, but my understanding is that in every communication they issued, they opposed all vaccine mandates.
Okay, can we please pull up JCF 50191? And while that's being pulled up, just for the benefit of my friends, this is a compilation of documents that are listed individually in the database. I'll mention their IDs as we go through. I'm just using this to save a bit of time as we pull up documents. So
No, and the idea was to consult our stakeholders, our key partners. But I'm not able to answer your question about the level of engagement and who exactly was involved in this development.
Thank you. Okay, so let me put it to you this way. When you're in a situation, and you've already talked about your call with Minister Mulrooney on February the 9th, and in your witness statement, you state that in that call, Minister Mulrooney advised you that Transport Canada's enforcement proposals were simply unworkable. That's what she told you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that was the exact word, but maybe it was, but saying that what we were proposing was not doable.
Okay. So if you're in this kind of situation where your provincial colleagues are maybe not on board at the moment, and you're in a situation where safe resolution requires 3 levels of government to collaborate, wouldn't you agree that you should reach out directly to consult with the impacted municipalities on this kind of strategy?
Again, I reached out to Mayor Dilkens and I had a conversation with him to hear from him about what's going on, to get a briefing from him, and then I offered him what else can we do to help. So I had direct conversation with the mayor, as I said, my other colleagues as well.
Right. And so it is important to reach out directly to the municipality then. You agree?
I think so.
Yeah. Deputy Minister Keenan also confirmed that Transport Canada would not have shared the strategy with Windsor after it was finalized, and again relied on Transport Canada's provincial partners to share it as they saw fit. And he didn't know if it had been shared. I take it you did not share the strategy with Windsor.
I didn't, but again, the document was about provincial and federal tools, and mostly provincial tools. So it made, I guess, sense. And again, I shouldn't be talking about what exactly happened because I wasn't involved in it, but maybe I'm attempting at understanding what happened.
Right. And so we did get some clarity on that from the Deputy Minister. I can tell you that I'm not aware of any evidence that Windsor received it.
Half weeks was on and off. So there was also still no confidence that the whole issue is going to be resolved this quickly. So the short answer to your question, no, I don't think it would have changed my mind.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions this afternoon.
Thank you.
And thank you for your indulgence, Commissioner.
No problem.
Driver.
And you mentioned supply chains as well. I understand that on January 31st, you participated in a supply chain summit. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. I just explained to you how vulnerable and turbulent our economy was at that moment as we are coming out of the acute phase of COVID after significant disruptions. Supply chains certainly were impacted, and what our government wanted to do and what I wanted to do is go to action on figuring out what can the federal government do to strengthen our supply chains, to respond to the ongoing challenges that we're facing. And we held a summit. I hosted a summit that invited key stakeholders, industry leaders from different sectors to come together and talk about what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and what their recommendations are for the federal government to ensure that we have stronger, more resilient supply chains. And by the way, it included representatives of the trucking industry.
And you also spoke about the feedback that you were getting from the trucking industry. And I just want to, and industries in general, I just want to pull up a document. Mr. Clerk, if you could pull up ssm.can.50958.
I have to say, I'm impressed at how fast you pull the documents.
And is this a document you recognize, Minister?
Yes, this is a press release by the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturing Association.
And
Manufacturers Association.
And was this something you were aware of at the time?
Yes. In fact,
Folks, if you want to be kept up to date on what's happening at the Emergency Act inquiry, including my live tweets and some clips and highlights that occurring at the Emergency Act inquiry, by heading over to revolutionnews.ca/Emergency Act Commission. That's revolutionnews.ca/Emergency Act Commission. And of course, here, folks, while you're there, please head over to donorbox.org/Emergency Act Commission. That's donorbox.org/Emergency Act Commission. And of course, here, folks, if you could chip in a buck or two, that will be greatly appreciated, as it will help me cover my travel expenses, including my expenses on food, as bringing you these stories doesn't come for free. Thank you so much.